Dr. Kayla Brennan had always prided herself on being unflappable. When you've spent 6 years convincing traumatized rescue animals that not all humans are monsters, you develop a certain immunity to intimidation. She'd stared down everything from resource-guarding Rottweilers to a particularly vindictive macaw named Professor Chaos, who'd learned to pick locks and harbored what could only be described as a vendetta against veterinarians. So sitting in what appeared to be a crystalline fishbowl, hurtling through space at speeds that would make physics professors weep, Kayla felt remarkably bored. The waiting room aboard the Galactic Council research vessel, Infinite Bureaucracy, had clearly been designed by beings who'd read about comfort in a manual, but never actually experienced it. The chairs were geometrically perfect and about as welcoming as a tax audit. Holographic displays cycled through what she assumed were meant to be soothing images, swirling nebulae, peaceful alien landscapes, and something that looked like a sunset if sunsets were purple and had tentacles. Dr. Brennan. The voice belonged to a creature that looked like someone had taken a praying mantis, given it opposable thumbs, and enrolled it in business school. Three compound eyes regarded her with the kind of polite disinterest usually reserved for insurance adjusters. I am Administrator Zeph9. Just one thing before we begin. YouTube tells me 93.6% of you watching aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. It really supports the channel, and you'll get more amazing HFY sci-fi stories delivered straight to you. Don't miss out. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Kayla raised an eyebrow. Invitation was a generous term for what had essentially been a very polite abduction. One day she'd been trying to convince a anxiety-ridden beagle named Biscuit that mailmen weren't actually harbingers of doom, and the next she'd been whisked away by beings who spoke in bureaucratic euphemisms and seemed to think her job title was Apex Predator Psychological Manipulation Specialist. Right, she said, following Zeph9 down a corridor that screamed, "Government efficiency meets alien feng shui." About that invitation. Your people mentioned something about dangerous predators needing rehabilitation, but the paperwork was a little vague. Zeph9's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or possibly indigestion. Ah, yes, the Dangerous Predator Rehabilitation Initiative. We have studied your work extensively, Dr. Brennan. Your success rate with hostile Earth creatures is remarkable. Kayla thought about her client list. Mostly anxious dogs, a few cats with anger management issues, and one memorable case involving a therapy horse with stage fright. Hostile seemed like a strong word for animals who mainly needed patience, consistency, and the occasional liver treat. They entered what could generously be called a briefing room, though it looked more like the inside of a very expensive medical device. Three other beings waited around a table that appeared to be grown rather than built. Kayla took in her new teammates with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to read body language. Across species barriers, the first was clearly military, reptilian features, scales that shifted color with what she suspected were emotional states, and the kind of rigid posture that screamed, "Career officer with trust issues." The nameplate in front of him read, "Commander Thrix Vac Hound," which sounded like someone had let a random name generator loose on a fantasy novel. Next to him sat what appeared to be a giant insect wearing the alien equivalent of a lab coat. Multiple eyes tracked her movement while delicate limbs manipulated what looked like a tablet made of liquid mercury. The nameplate read, "Dr. Xenobiologist, Frill 12, because apparently aliens had embraced the efficiency of numbered designations over the messy complexity of actual names. The third being defied easy categorization. It looked like someone had achieved sentience through the medium of grape jelly, constantly shifting between shapes while maintaining a roughly humanoid outline. A small sign in front of it proudly declared, "Assistant Researcher, Blob Entity, who chose the name Kevin. Please use Kevin." "Dr. Brennan," Zeph9 announced with the enthusiasm of someone introducing a tax code amendment, "meet your research team." Commander Vac Hound's scales shifted to what Kayla suspected was a deeper shade of skeptical. "With respect, Administrator, are we certain one human is sufficient for this operation? The psychological warfare capabilities of her species are documented, but psychological warfare? Kayla interrupted, sitting down in what she hoped was a chair and not some kind of alien furniture that would judge her life choices. I teach anxious dogs to stop peeing on things. That's not exactly warfare. Dr. Frill 12's compound eyes all focused on her simultaneously, which was about as comfortable as it sounded. Ah, but your methods are quite sophisticated, Dr. Brennan. We have studied your techniques extensively. The vocal manipulation protocols you employ, what you call baby talk, have proven remarkably effective at inducing compliance in hostile subjects. Kayla blinked. You mean talking nicely to scared animals? Precisely. Frill 12's enthusiasm was slightly terrifying, and your use of positive reinforcement, providing rewards for desired behavior, is clearly a form of psychological conditioning that achieves dominance through pleasure association rather than fear. Brilliant and subtle. It's just basic animal training, Kayla said slowly, beginning to understand why this conversation felt like trying to explain color to someone who'd only ever heard it described. You give them good things when they do good things, so they want to do more good things. Kevin the blob entity rippled with what might have been excitement. See? Even the way she explains it is manipulative. She makes complex psychological warfare sound simple and harmless. This was not going the way Kayla had hoped. Okay, maybe we should back up. What exactly do you need me to do? Zeph 9 activated a holographic display that made Kayla immediately wish she'd asked for hazard pay. The image showed something that looked like a nightmare designed by committee. 12 feet of midnight black scales, 6 limbs ending in claws that could probably open cans from 3 feet away, and enough teeth to stock a dental museum's anxiety disorder exhibit. Shadowmaw Devastators, Commander Vackhound announced with the tone of someone discussing a particularly virulent plague. The Draconian Empire's primary bioweapon. These creatures have terrorized 17 star systems, destroyed entire fleets, and once consumed in diplomatic convoy, ambassadors, ship, and escort vessels. Kayla studied the image, noting details the others seemed to miss. The creature's posture, the way it held its head, the tension in its limbs. How long have they been in captivity? Approximately 6 Earth months, Frill 12 replied. We captured 7 specimens after their most recent defeat. They have been contained in separate high-security cells while we study their behavioral patterns. Separate cells? Kayla's professional alarm bell started ringing. Are they social animals? The research team exchanged glances. They typically attack in coordinated groups, Commander Vackhound admitted. Our xenobiologists believe this indicates a hive mind structure or shared consciousness. Kayla looked at the hologram again, seeing past the intimidating exterior to the behavioral cues she'd learned to recognize in every species she'd worked with. The defensive posturing, the way the creature seemed to be scanning for threats, the slight tremor in its limbs that spoke of stress rather than aggression. Or, she said carefully, they're pack animals who work together to protect their family, and you've been keeping family members isolated from each other for 6 months. The silence that followed could have powered a small space station. Family? Kevin's gelatinous form quivered with what might have been confusion. But they're bioweapons. Weapons don't have families. Everything has a family, Kayla said, the words coming out with more heat than she'd intended. Everything has relationships, social bonds, emotional needs. That's not a human thing. That's a living thing. Dr. Frill 12's many eyes blinked in sequence, creating a visual effect that was probably supposed to indicate deep thought, but mostly made Kayla slightly dizzy. Are you suggesting that the Shadowmaw Devastators' coordinated attacks were not strategic military maneuvers, but rather emotional responses? I'm suggesting that if you separate pack animals from their pack, they get stressed, anxious, and aggressive, Kayla replied. And stressed, anxious, aggressive animals are dangerous animals, regardless of what planet they're from. Commander Vackhound's scales had shifted to what she was pretty sure was a defensive pattern. Dr. Brennan, these creatures have been classified as inherently hostile. Their entire biology is designed for violence. Kayla had heard variations of this argument about everything from pit bulls to parrots. Their biology is designed for survival. Violence is just one tool in that toolkit. The question is, what are they trying to survive? She looked around the table at four beings who clearly thought she was either brilliantly manipulative or completely insane. Possibly both. So, she said, settling back in her, probably a chair, with the air of someone who'd made peace with poor life choices. When do I get to meet them? The silence this time could have achieved interstellar flight. Commander Vakhound's scales cycled through what Kayla was beginning to suspect was the alien equivalent of a panic attack. You want to be in the same room as the Apex destroyers? Without sedation protocols? Without armed containment teams? Kayla shrugged, the gesture carrying 6 years of professional confidence and the kind of resigned pragmatism that comes from choosing a career in impossible cases. How else am I supposed to help them? The looks the aliens exchanged clearly communicated a single unified thought. The human has chosen death, and we're all going to watch it happen. What they didn't understand, what Kayla was beginning to realize they couldn't understand, was that she'd never met a monster that wasn't just a scared animal wearing someone else's nightmare. And if that was what awaited her in the depths of this sterile research facility, well, she'd brought treats. The journey to the containment level involved enough security checkpoints to make airport security weep with envy. Kayla found herself subjected to 17 different scans, 3 psychological evaluations, and what appeared to be some kind of ritual blessing performed by a nervous-looking technician who kept muttering what sounded like prayers in a language that hurt her ears. Standard safety protocols, Commander Vakhound explained as they descended in an elevator that moved with the kind of elaborate caution usually reserved for transporting unstable explosives. The Shadowmaw Devastators have killed every researcher who has attempted direct contact. Kayla raised an eyebrow. Every researcher? Well, Dr. Frill-12 interjected with the academic precision of someone who lived for footnotes. Technically, they killed every researcher who entered their containment areas with the intention of establishing dominance through force projection or pharmaceutical compliance. You mean everyone who went in planning to either fight them or drug them, Kayla translated. Precisely. Kevin bounced with enthusiasm, his gelatinous form rippling. Which is why your psychological manipulation techniques are so fascinating. You achieve compliance through emotional conditioning rather than physical subjugation. Kayla wondered, not for the first time, if she should mention that her psychological manipulation techniques mostly consisted of being nice to animals and giving them snacks. She decided against it. At this point, their misconceptions were probably the only thing keeping her from being classified as a dangerous weapon herself. The containment level looked like someone had crossed a maximum security prison with a day spa, then handed the design over to beings who'd read about relaxation in a technical manual. Everything was white, chrome, and aggressively soothing in the way that suggested the designers had studied human psychology, but never actually met a human. Observation deck first, Zeph9 announced, leading them to a chamber that offered a view into what could generously be called a habitat and more accurately described as a very expensive cage. Through reinforced transparent aluminum, because apparently regular glass wasn't sufficient for containing Galaxy-class predators, Kayla got her first real look at a Shadowmaw Devastator. Her professional assessment was immediate and instinctive. Oh, you poor baby. The creature was exactly as advertised. 12 feet of midnight black scales, claws that could probably field dress a small spacecraft, and teeth that belonged in a paleontologist's nightmares. But Kayla's trained eye saw past the intimidation factor to the behavioral cues that screamed louder than any roar. The pacing, the defensive posturing, the way it kept checking corners and exits, the slight tremor in its limbs that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with chronic stress. How long has he been pacing like that? She asked. Subject 1 maintains this behavioral pattern for approximately 18 hours per day, Dr. Frill-12 reported with clinical detachment. We believe it indicates constant strategizing and escape planning. It indicates anxiety, Kayla corrected. watching the creature wear a groove in the floor with the obsessive repetition of someone whose world had become too small and too uncertain. He's stress pacing. It's a coping mechanism. Commander Vackhound's scales shifted to what she was learning indicated skepticism. You can determine this creature's emotional state through observation? Same way I can tell you're nervous right now, Kayla replied, gesturing at his color-changing scales. Body language is pretty universal. Fear, stress, anxiety. They look the same whether you're dealing with a traumatized rescue dog or a... She paused, studying the Shadowmaw's movements. A traumatized rescue space dragon. The team exchanged looks that clearly communicated their shared belief that humans possessed terrifying psychic abilities. I'd like to go in, Kayla announced. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Kevin's gelatinous form hitting the floor in what appeared to be a dead faint. Absolutely not. Commander Vackhound's scales cycled through what looked like every color of panic in the visible spectrum. The safety protocols are designed for people who don't understand animal behavior, Kayla interrupted. Look, you've tried force, you've tried drugs, you've tried isolation. How's that working out for you? They remain uncooperative, Zeph9 admitted with bureaucratic reluctance. Because you're treating symptoms instead of causes, Kayla said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through photos of past clients. Look, this is Biscuit. She showed them a picture of a trembling beagle. When he came to me, he was aggressive, destructive. Wouldn't let anyone near him. Know why? The research team leaned in with the intensity of academics presented with a new theorem. Because his previous owner used to kick him when he was scared, so he learned that showing fear meant getting hurt. So he got aggressive to hide the fear, which made people think he was dangerous, which made them treat him worse, which made him more scared and more aggressive. She swiped to another photo, the same beagle relaxed and happy, sitting calmly next to a small child. This is him 6 months later. Know what changed? You dominated him psychologically? Dr. Frill 12 ventured. I was nice to him, Kayla said. I gave him treats when he was calm. I spoke softly. I let him approach me instead of forcing interaction. I treated him like a scared animal instead of a dangerous weapon. She looked back at the Shadowmaw, still pacing his endless circuit. Your apex destroyer is just a scared animal who's been treated like a dangerous weapon for so long, he's forgotten there's any other way to be. The containment chamber's entrance required 17 different authorization codes, 3 biometric scans, and what appeared to be a small prayer service conducted by the facility's AI. The doors opened with the kind of elaborate ceremony usually reserved for nuclear disarmament. Kayla stepped inside wearing her discount blazer from Target and carrying a small bag that contained what she optimistically called her universal animal therapy kit. Treats of various textures and flavors, a few toys, and the kind of boundless professional optimism that came from 6 years of dealing with creatures everyone else had given up on. The Shadowmaw stopped pacing. 12 feet of Galaxy-class Predator turned to look at the small human who had just entered its domain. And for a moment that stretched across light years of evolutionary difference, two beings sized each other up. Kayla saw anxiety, confusion, and the desperate wariness of something that had learned to expect pain from every interaction. The Shadowmaw saw, well, probably a small, soft creature that smelled like mammals and seemed entirely too calm for something that was about to become lunch. In the observation deck, 4 beings held their collective breath. Kayla sat down, not crouched defensively, not stood ready to run, but actually sat down cross-legged on the floor and made herself smaller, less threatening, less like every other creature that had entered this space with dominance and control on their agenda. Hey there, big guy, she said in the same gentle, slightly silly voice she used with all her patience. Yeah, I know. New person. Very suspicious. Those aliens have been poking at you with their little instruments, haven't they? That's gotta be annoying. The Shadowmaw tilted its massive head, and Kayla caught her first glimpse of something that would later reshape galactic understanding of predator psychology. Confusion. Not the calculating assessment of a hunter evaluating prey, but the genuine bewilderment of a creature encountering something outside its experience. Must be pretty boring in here, Kayla continued, noting the complete absence of enrichment activities, social interaction, or anything that might engage a clearly intelligent being. Just pacing and pacing and pacing. I bet you'd like to stretch your legs somewhere bigger, huh? In the observation deck, Dr. Frill 12 was frantically taking notes. She's initiated the vocal manipulation protocol. Note the tonal variations, clearly designed to induce a hypnotic state. Commander Vackhound nodded grimly. Classic human psychological warfare. Observe how she's assumed a submissive posture to lull the creature into false security before striking. Kevin, who had recovered from his faint, was recording everything with the enthusiasm of someone witnessing history. The predator appears confused by her strategy. It doesn't know how to respond to non-aggressive behavior. What none of them understood was that the Shadowmaw, let's call him Gary, because he reminded Kayla of a particularly anxious German shepherd she'd once worked with, was experiencing something he hadn't felt in 6 months of captivity: the absence of threat. Gary took a cautious step forward, and every alarm in the facility went off. Abort! Commander Vackhound's voice crackled through the comm system. Dr. Brennan, withdraw immediately. Kayla didn't move. Turn off the alarms, she said calmly. You're scaring him. We're scaring him. Vackhound's voice climbed several octaves. It's moving toward you. He's investigating, Kayla corrected, watching Gary's body language with professional interest. Look at his posture, head lowered, movements slow and deliberate. That's not attack behavior, that's curiosity. Gary took another step, then made a sound that caused 3 different emergency protocols to activate simultaneously. It was somewhere between a whine and a rumble, the kind of noise that suggested either imminent violence or, "Oh, you poor baby," Kayla cooed, recognizing the sound immediately. It was the same noise traumatized dogs made when they were testing whether this new human might actually be safe. You're asking if I'm okay, aren't you? Making sure I'm not scared? She slowly extended her hand, not for Gary to smell, different biology, but in the universal gesture of, I'm not a threat, see? No weapons, no intentions of harm. Gary, terror of 17 star systems, nightmare of the Draconian Empire, approached Kayla's outstretched hand with the delicate caution of a creature that had learned to expect pain from every interaction, but was desperately hoping this time might be different. When his massive snout gently touched her palm, the observation deck fell silent. Then Gary did something that would be studied by xenobiologists for the next 1,000 years. He purred, not a rumble of aggression or a growl of warning, but an actual, unmistakable purr of contentment that resonated through the containment chamber like a geological event. Kayla scratched behind what might generously be called his ears, and Gary's eyes, all 6 of them, actually closed in bliss. In the observation deck, Dr. Frill 12 was having what could only be described as a complete academic breakdown. This is impossible. Shadowmaw Devastators don't have purring mechanisms. They don't form social bonds. They don't exhibit pleasure responses to physical contact. Commander Vackhound was frantically updating his tactical assessment. She's achieved complete psychological dominance in under 10 minutes. This human is more dangerous than our projections indicated. Kevin was just happy to be witnessing history. Should I write this down? But Kayla, sitting in a pile of content Space Dragon, was already thinking ahead to the real problem. Gary was obviously the anxious, submissive member of his pack, but Shadowmaws were social hunters, which meant, so, she said, looking up at the observation window with the expression of someone who just realized the scope of the project she'd accidentally signed up for, where are the other 6? The silence that followed could have been heard across 3 star systems. Somewhere in the depths of the research facility, 6 other Shadowmaw Devastators were pacing their own endless circuits, separated from their packmate, isolated and stressed, and probably getting more dangerous by the day. Kayla looked down at Gary, who had somehow managed to arrange his 12 feet of death machine into something approximating a lapdog, and sighed. This is going to be more complicated than I thought. The emergency meeting that followed could have powered a small moon with its sheer panic energy. Kayla sat in what she was beginning to suspect was actually a very comfortable torture device, while four alien beings processed the fact that their most fundamental understanding of apex predator behavior had just been obliterated by a woman who talked to space dragons like they were anxious golden retrievers. The implications are staggering, Dr. Frill-12 muttered, his compound eyes blinking in rapid sequence as he recalculated 17 different research papers. If Subject 1 exhibits social bonding behavior, attachment responses, and anxiety-based stress patterns, then everything we know about Shadowmaw psychology is wrong. Commander Vakhound finished, his scales cycling through what Kayla had learned was the alien equivalent of an existential crisis. Not wrong, Kayla corrected, scratching Gary behind his ear equivalents as he maintained his position as the galaxy's most dangerous lap pet. Incomplete. You've been studying them like weapons instead of animals. Zeph-9's three eyes focused on her with the intensity of someone whose entire bureaucratic worldview was crumbling. Dr. Brennan, you mentioned the other specimens. Do you truly believe they would respond similarly to your techniques? Kayla looked down at Gary, who had managed to arrange himself into a position that was probably anatomically impossible, but definitely comfortable. Depends. Where are they, and what condition are they in? The silence that followed had the quality of a confession booth. The remaining 6 Shadowmaw Devastators are housed in individual containment units across this facility, Commander Vakhound admitted, with the tone of someone revealing state secrets. Standard protocol requires complete isolation to prevent coordinated escape attempts. You separated a pack, Kayla said, her voice carrying the kind of professional disappointment usually reserved for people who use shock collars. For 6 months. They're weapons, Vakhound protested. Biological killing machines engineered for... Their family, Kayla interrupted, and Gary lifted his massive head to look at her with what could only be described as gratitude. Look at him. Does this look like a mindless killing machine to you? Gary, as if on cue, made a small chittering sound and gently bumped his snout against Kayla's shoulder in what any animal behaviorist would recognize as an affection display. Kevin's gelatinous form rippled with excitement. She's maintaining psychological control even during debriefing. The predator continues to demonstrate submission behaviors. He's not being submissive, Kayla sighed. He's being affectionate. There's a difference. Affectionate? Dr. Frill-12's academic brain was clearly struggling with this concept. Shadowmaw Devastators don't possess the neurological structures for what exactly? Kayla challenged. For caring about each other? For missing their family? For being scared and lonely and desperate for any kind of positive interaction? She gestured at Gary, who was now making soft rumbling sounds that definitely weren't threatening. This guy has been isolated from his pack for 6 months, poked and prodded by researchers who see him as a specimen instead of a person, and kept in conditions that would drive any social animal insane. The fact that he's still capable of trust and affection is honestly miraculous. But the coordinated attacks, Commander Vakhound insisted, the strategic formations, the calculated aggression, protection, Kayla said simply. Pack animals protect each other. The more threatened they feel, the more aggressive they become. You want to see their real nature? Let me reunite them. The suggestion was met with the kind of horror usually reserved for proposing to juggle antimatter while tap dancing. Absolutely not. Vakhound's scales had shifted to what appeared to be military-grade alarm. 7 Shadowmaw Devastators together could tear through the hull of this ship. Or, Kayla countered, they could calm down and stop being traumatized. Let me work with one more. The Alpha. The Alpha? Zeph-9's mandibles clicked nervously. Subject 7 is particularly aggressive. Kayla had heard this before. Aggressive or protective. Another uncomfortable silence. Subject 7 has terminated 6 research attempts, Dr. Frill-12 admitted. She appears to be the pack's primary defensive coordinator. She's the mom, Kayla translated, the one who takes care of everyone else, and is absolutely furious that her family's been hurt. She looked around at 4 beings who clearly thought she was suggesting they play catch with a nuclear warhead. Bring her here. Here? Kevin's form actually solidified in shock. With Subject 1? With Gary, Kayla corrected. His name is Gary. An hour later, Kayla found herself in the facility's largest containment area, which had been hastily converted into something resembling a natural habitat if you ignore the obvious blast doors and emergency containment systems. Gary had been moved here first, and he was already showing signs of reduced stress. Less pacing, more exploration, actual interest in his environment. The doors opened with the kind of elaborate ceremony usually reserved for deactivating planet killers, and Subject 7 entered like she owned the place. Kayla's first thought was that this Shadowmaw was different, bigger, more confident, with scars that spoke of protecting others rather than random violence. Her second thought was that Gary's excited chittering and obvious joy at seeing her confirmed everything Kayla had suspected about pack dynamics. Her third thought was that Subject 7, who she immediately dubbed Princess because of her obvious attitude, was looking directly at her with an expression that could only be described as assessment. Not the hungry assessment of a predator sizing up prey, but the careful evaluation of a mother figure, determining whether this new creature was a threat to her family. Kayla sat down cross-legged and waited. Princess approached with the kind of measured confidence that spoke of absolute authority and zero tolerance for nonsense. She was clearly the alpha of this pack, the one who made decisions and protected the others, and she was not impressed with the current situation. Gary chittered excitedly and bounded over to Princess, who immediately began what could only be described as a health inspection, checking him over with the efficiency of a field medic and the tenderness of worried parent. "She's making sure he's okay," Kayla observed to her increasingly stunned audience, "checking for injuries, signs of distress, probably getting his version of what's been happening." Princess finished her examination of Gary, seemed satisfied that he was unharmed, and then turned her full attention to Kayla. What happened next would be recorded in xenobiological history as either the greatest breakthrough in interspecies communication or the luckiest moment in galactic research. Princess, terror of star systems and nightmare of military strategists, slowly lowered her massive head until she was at eye level with the small human sitting calmly on the floor. For a moment that stretched across evolutionary chasms, apex predator and animal therapist regarded each other with mutual respect. Then Princess made a sound that Kayla recognized immediately, the same questioning rumble that stressed mother animals made when they needed to know if their babies were safe. "They're okay," Kayla said softly, understanding perfectly. "Gary's fine, and I'm going to help you get the rest of your family back." Princess tilted her head, considering, and then did something that shattered every military assessment of Shadowmaw behavior. She gently bumped her snout against Kayla's forehead in what any animal behaviorist would recognize as a gesture of acceptance and trust. In the observation booth, Commander Vackhound was updating his threat assessment in real time. "The Alpha has acknowledged her authority?" "She's acknowledged that I'm not a threat to her pack," Kayla corrected, reaching up to scratch Princess behind what might generously be called ears, "and that I might actually be able to help them." She looked up at the observation window with the expression of someone who'd just realized the full scope of what she'd gotten herself into. "So," she said, as Princess settled beside her with the kind of protective positioning that clearly marked Kayla as under her personal protection, "when can I meet the other 5? 3 months later, Dr. Kayla Brennan sat in her new office aboard the renamed research station Second Chances, watching through reinforced windows as 7 reformed apex predators gently guided a group of traumatized war veterans through breathing exercises. Gary had found his calling working with anxiety disorders. His own nervous energy somehow helped other anxious beings feel less alone. Princess had become the station's unofficial therapy coordinator, her natural protective instincts making her perfect for helping those who'd lost their sense of safety. The other 5 had each discovered their own specialties in what Kayla cheerfully called the galaxy's most dangerous wellness center. "Status report, Doctor?" Commander Vackhound entered, his scales now permanently set to what Kayla had learned was grudging respect mixed with existential confusion. 17 successful therapy sessions today," Kayla replied, watching Princess gently nudge a shell-shocked pilot toward a relaxation area. 0 incidents of anyone being eaten. "The Galactic Council is requesting another demonstration," Vackhound continued. 3 more monster species have been referred for evaluation. Kayla sighed, pulling up her schedule on a tablet that still seemed like magic despite months of use. Let me guess. They're probably just homesick, overstimulated, or missing their families. Through the window, Gary noticed her watching and made his characteristic happy chittering sound, which immediately drew Princess's attention. The massive alpha approached the window and, in a gesture that still made xenobiologists weep, gently lowered her great head in what had become her customary greeting. Kayla pressed her palm against the transparent aluminum, and Princess touched her snout to the same spot. Apex predator and human sharing a moment of quiet understanding across the barrier. You know what the real irony is? Kayla asked, watching as the other Shadowmaws noticed their alpha's attention and began gathering around the window, each taking turns to lower their heads in respectful greeting. Everyone was so busy being afraid of them that nobody bothered to notice they were afraid too. She stood, grabbing her jacket and the treat bag that had become her signature accessory. Come on, let's go meet these new monsters. I bet they just need someone to listen. Commander Vackhound followed, shaking his head as 7 apex predators pressed against the window like oversized puppies saying goodbye to their favorite human. Outside, a new transport was arriving with another species that had terrorized the galaxy until someone decided to ask what they were really afraid of. Kayla smiled. It was going to be another interesting day in the universe's most unusual therapy practice.
Hi friend, my name is Amir. Welcome to HFI protocol, where humans stand against alien and prove their strength.